David Miller, was 36 years old and lived in a modest apartment on the south side of Chicago with his 9-year-old son, Ethan. Ever since his wife passed away in a car accident 4 years earlier, David had raised Ethan alone. Life had become a constant balancing act between being a loving father and finding enough work to keep food on the table. He had once been a respected construction supervisor, but when the company closed during an economic downturn, he lost the stable job he had relied on for years. Since then, he had taken temporary jobs wherever he could, yet nothing lasted long enough to provide security for his small family. Every morning began before sunrise. David prepared breakfast, packed Ethan's lunch, and walked him to the neighborhood school before searching online for job openings. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, and the landlord had already reminded him twice that rent was overdue. Even during the hardest days, David never let Ethan see his fear. Instead, he encouraged his son to study hard, reminding him that education could open doors no one could ever close. Deep inside, however, David wondered how much longer he could keep their lives together. One phone call offering permanent employment could change everything for them. That call finally came from Hayes Technologies, one of New York City's fastest-growing technology companies. David had applied weeks earlier for an operations manager position, never expecting a response. When the recruiter invited him for an interview, hope returned for the first time in months. He borrowed money from a longtime friend to buy a bus ticket to New York because he couldn't afford a flight. The night before leaving, he carefully pressed his only navy blue suit, polished his worn black shoes, and promised Ethan that he would come home with good news. Ethan hugged him tightly and whispered that he believed his dad was the strongest man in the world. The following morning, David arrived at the company's towering glass headquarters nearly an hour early. Employees in expensive business attire walked confidently through the lobby while he quietly waited. Reviewing his notes one final time, although nervous, he reminded himself that honesty and hard work had carried him through every challenge before. Soon, a receptionist escorted him into a modern conference room, where 3 executives greeted him politely. They asked about his management experience, leadership skills, and previous projects. David answered every question with confidence, drawing from years of supervising construction teams and solving difficult problems under pressure. The interview seemed to be going surprisingly well, and for the first time, he imagined calling Ethan with wonderful news. Near the end of the interview, one executive noticed a 2-year gap on David's resume and asked him to explain it. The room became silent as David took a slow breath. Instead of inventing an excuse, he admitted that his son had suffered a serious illness, and he had stepped away from full-time work to become his caregiver until Ethan recovered. The executives exchanged uncertain glances before thanking him for his honesty. Minutes later, they politely informed him they had chosen another candidate. David smiled despite the disappointment, shook each person's hand, and quietly walked toward the elevator, unaware that the Billionaire CEO had been watching the entire interview from her office and had already made a decision that would change his life forever. David stepped out of the elevator with his shoulders heavy and his dreams slipping away. He thanked the receptionist for her kindness, adjusted the strap of his worn briefcase, and walked toward the revolving doors. Outside, the streets of Manhattan buzzed with taxis, business people, and tourists. But David barely noticed any of it. His thoughts were fixed on Ethan waiting back in Chicago, hoping his father would return with good news. David wondered how he would explain another rejection without letting his son see the disappointment in his eyes. Even then, he refused to blame the interview panel, believing every setback carried a lesson. Just as David reached the sidewalk, he heard someone calling his name. He turned around in surprise and saw a woman in an elegant navy business suit running out of the building with 2 assistants trying to keep up. It was Victoria Hayes, the Billionaire founder and CEO of Hayes Technologies. Employees passing by stopped in disbelief because they had never seen their CEO run after a job applicant. Catching her breath, Victoria apologized for stopping him and asked if he had a few minutes to talk. Confused but respectful, David nodded, unsure why one of America's most successful business leaders wanted to speak with him. Victoria invited David back inside and led him to her private office overlooking the New York skyline. She explained that she had watched his interview through the company's executive review system. While the interview panel had focused on his employment gap, she had focused on something entirely different. She admired the calm way he answered difficult questions and the honesty he showed when speaking about caring for his son. Most applicants tried to impress people with polished stories, but David had spoken with sincerity. To Victoria, character mattered far more than a perfect resume because skills could be taught, but integrity could not. She had already asked her human resources team to verify David's background. They discovered that everything he had said was true. Former co-workers described him as dependable, hardworking, and respected by everyone he supervised. They also learned that during Ethan's illness, David had quietly sold his motorcycle and many personal belongings to pay medical expenses without asking anyone for help. Hearing those details confirmed Victoria's instincts. She smiled warmly and admitted that the interview panel had made a mistake. They had overlooked the very qualities she believed created exceptional leaders. Instead of offering David the operations manager position he had originally applied for, Victoria presented him with a completely different opportunity. She wanted him to become director of community partnerships, leading programs that supported employees and families facing personal hardships. The position included an excellent salary, full health benefits, relocation assistance to New York, and educational support for Ethan, 1-2. David sat speechless, convinced he had misunderstood. When Victoria slid the official contract across the desk, tears filled his eyes. He accepted the offer with gratitude, not because of the money alone, but because someone had finally recognized the value of compassion, honesty, and sacrifice. Several months later, David had transformed the department into one of the company's greatest strengths. His programs helped struggling employees, supported single parents, and built a workplace where people genuinely cared for one another. Ethan settled happily into his new school, proud to tell his classmates that his father worked beside the CEO. Looking back, David realized that walking away from the interview had not been the end of his journey but the beginning of a better life. Sometimes the opportunity meant for you arrives only after you believe you've lost everything, proving that true character is always recognized by the right person. 2-2.